She walked into the grand hall in worn-out shoes and a borrowed uniform, trying her best to stay invisible. The chandeliers sparkled overhead, the floor gleamed like a mirror, and the guests in designer gowns barely noticed her as she quietly swept in the corners. It was supposed to be just another night of cleaning after the rich and powerful, blending into the background like she always did. But what no one knew, what no one could have guessed, was who she really was. The gala was the most talked about event in the city, a celebration of elegance, wealth, and influence. Celebrities, politicians, and business tycoons filled the room, laughing over champagne and clinking glasses. The host, a mysterious man known for his deep pockets and deeper secrets, watched the crowd with careful eyes. Everyone was there to impress him. No one paid attention to the quiet woman wiping down a spill by the entrance. Some of the guests began whispering about her, mocking her shoes, her plain face, her quietness. One even handed her a napkin and asked her to polish their shoes. She said nothing. She just smiled gently and continued working. What they saw was a simple woman, someone who clearly didn't belong. But what they didn't know was that she had every right to be there, more than anyone else in the room. Then, just as the music softened and the lights dimmed for the host's speech, he stepped up to the microphone, cleared his throat, and glanced around the room. His eyes landed on her. He raised his hand, pointed at the woman in the cleaning uniform, and everything changed. The room froze. Glasses stopped mid-air. Whispers turned into stunned silence. Who was she really? And why did the host single her out in front of hundreds of powerful people? You won't believe what happened next. The host kept his eyes locked on her, and for a moment, it felt like the whole world had gone silent. People turned to look, confused and curious, unsure why he'd stopped everything to focus on someone they had all overlooked. Murmurs filled the air again. Who is she? Why is he looking at the cleaner? Some even laughed quietly, assuming it was a joke or some kind of lesson in charity. But the host wasn't smiling. She stood still, gripping her cleaning rag tightly, trying to understand what was happening. Her heart pounded. She didn't want this attention. For years, she had worked hard to stay unnoticed. She had buried her past, left behind a life that once drew headlines and whispers in boardrooms. No one in this room knew her story, or at least, that's what she believed. The host cleared his throat again and took a slow step toward her. "There's someone here tonight," he said, his voice calm but powerful, "whose presence changes everything." The words hung in the air. The crowd shifted, some leaning forward, others whispering guesses. A few guests began to grow uncomfortable, remembering the way they had spoken to her earlier. The woman lowered her eyes, wishing she could disappear, but it was too late. The moment had already started unraveling the truth. Years ago, she had been part of this world. She had worn the gowns, signed the checks, been escorted by bodyguards and reporters. But after a sudden tragedy and a string of betrayals, she walked away from it all. She chose silence over scandal, work over wealth. Now, standing in a borrowed uniform, she was facing the past. She thought she'd escaped forever, but why now? Why had the host brought her into the spotlight again? What did he know, and what was he planning to reveal? Something bigger was happening here, and the truth hadn't even begun to surface. The silence stretched as the host walked toward her, each step echoing across the marble floor. Cameras turned, capturing her confused expression, the sweat on her brow, the disbelief in the room. She could feel every eye pressing on her, the weight of old memories creeping up her spine. A few guests looked stunned, some in disbelief, others in recognition, though they couldn't quite place her face. But there were whispers now, names being passed around. A few thought they knew who she was. One man in the corner, a business executive who had once sat across from her in a boardroom, looked pale as he slowly backed away toward the exit. What she didn't know was that her return hadn't been an accident. The host had invited her for a reason, under the disguise of a cleaning job arranged through a third-party agency. It was all deliberate. He needed her there, not just as a witness, but as a key to a much larger game. This gala wasn't just a celebration, it was a gathering of people connected by secrets, debts, and old rivalries. And she held something they all wanted to stay buried. A few feet away, the host paused, studying her face. She looked down, trying to hold herself together. He turned to the crowd and said, "Some of you may remember her, and some of you have spent years hoping you never would." The crowd stiffened. A woman near the front clutched her husband's arm. A well-known real estate mogul whispered something to his assistant before slipping away toward the restroom. Avoiding her gaze, in the back of the room, a journalist covering the event recognized the tension and quietly started recording. He didn't know the full story yet, but he could sense it. Something was about to break, something that could shake the foundations of everyone in that room. But before anything more could be said, the lights flickered, and then the power went out. Gasps filled the darkness as the chandeliers went black, casting the grand ballroom into silence and shadow. Someone knocked over a glass, and it shattered loudly on the floor. A few guests reached for their phones, their screens flickering on like weak stars in a night sky. The woman stood frozen, unsure whether to run or stay, her thoughts racing. She had been dragged into the spotlight against her will, but now, with the power out, anything could happen. Security guards moved quickly toward the exits, murmuring into radios, but even they seemed unsure. The host's voice was nowhere to be heard now, and that silence only deepened the tension. The journalist in the back kept his camera rolling, documenting every panicked whisper, every sideways glance. People were nervous not just because of the lights, but because of what might come next. In that moment of confusion, someone grabbed the woman's arm, not harshly, but firmly enough to make her flinch. She turned and found a familiar face. It was Lena, once her closest friend, now barely recognizable in a gown and expensive diamonds. Lena leaned in and whispered, "Why did you come back? Do you have any idea what you're doing?" Before she could answer, the lights flickered again, on, then off. A murmur ran through the crowd. Someone screamed. Tension snapped like a rubber band. In the chaos, the host's voice returned, loud and clear through a backup mic. "She's not just a cleaner," he said coldly. "She's the reason some of you have what you have, and the reason it may all be taken away tonight." The room went still again. Guests exchanged looks, some defensive, others frightened. Secrets were being threatened. Power, wealth, and reputations were all suddenly at risk. And right at the center of it was a woman who never asked to be here, but now had the eyes of the entire room locked on her. The real reason for the gala was about to be revealed, but then came a loud noise from the hallway, footsteps, shouting, and something that sounded like a door being broken open. The crowd spun toward the hallway as the sound grew louder. Rushed footsteps, heavy and panicked, followed by a sharp crash. A side door flew open, slamming against the wall. Two men in dark suits rushed inside, one holding a folder clutched tightly to his chest. Their presence wasn't part of the event, and it was immediately clear they weren't security. Whispers started again, louder this time, and the tension that had already been thick now turned electric. The host stepped down from the stage slowly, watching the two men with narrowed eyes. The woman stood silently, her heart hammering as if it could break through her chest. One of the men scanned the room, spotted her, and without hesitation walked straight toward her. He held out the folder. "We didn't have time," he said quietly, "but you need to see this. It's all in here. Every signature, every false deal. They lied to you and everyone else." She hesitated, hands trembling as she took the folder. Her eyes skimmed the pages. Legal documents, names. She recognized names of people currently in the room. Hidden partnerships, offshore accounts, forged agreements going back years. Some were tied to her old company. Others were far worse. One name stood out, the host. She looked up at him slowly, and he met her gaze without blinking. There was no fear in his eyes, only calm, calculated control. He had brought her here to expose the others, to corner them. But now it was clear, he had something to hide too. "You really thought I wouldn't find out?" she asked, voice low. He gave a faint smile. I was counting on it. Gasps rippled through the guests. The betrayal ran deeper than anyone imagined. This wasn't just about her past, it was about power games, control, and secrets worth millions. Suddenly, another voice rang out from the entrance, this time from a woman none of them recognized. "Everyone stay right where you are," she called out, flashing a badge. "This is now a federal investigation." Gasps swept through the ballroom as the woman with the badge stepped forward, flanked by two more agents. The mood shifted instantly. Fear took over the air, replacing curiosity and whispers. People backed away from the exits, some raising their hands slightly as if expecting to be cuffed. The agent walked directly to the host and the woman who had once been forced to clean floors in silence. "We've been investigating this for over a year," the agent said firmly. "And thanks to you," she nodded at the woman, "we finally have enough to act." The host tried to maintain his composure, but something in his eyes flickered. "You have no idea what you're interfering with," he muttered, the calm voice now tight with frustration. The woman didn't flinch. "No, I know exactly what I'm interfering with," she said, holding the folder tight to her chest. "You used me to bait them, but you were never clean either." The agent gestured to one of her partners, who stepped forward and handed the woman a second file. "What you don't know," the agent said, turning to face her, "is that someone else was working behind the scenes. Someone you trusted." A silence fell again. The woman opened the second file and felt the color drain from her face. Her old friend Lena. Her signature was there, again and again. Quietly selling company assets after the scandal, partnering with the host, feeding him information, smiling to her face while setting her up from the beginning. "You," she whispered, turning to Lena, who stood frozen, lips parted in shock. Lena's eyes filled with tears, but she said nothing. There was nothing left to say. The agents began making arrests. The host, Lena, several key guests. Chaos buzzed in the background, reporters shouting questions. But as the woman stepped aside, her eyes caught something, a figure near the back, slipping out unnoticed. She recognized him. He wasn't on any list, and he was the only one the agents didn't catch. The story wasn't over yet. Not even close. As the arrests continued and the ballroom emptied, the woman stood quietly in the corner, watching everything unfold. The same place where she'd once been told to mop floors was now where the truth had finally come to light. The host, now in handcuffs, passed her with one last glance, but there was no victory in his eyes, only regret. Lena didn't look at her at all, her head low, surrounded by flashing cameras and quiet accusations. The agents promised full investigations and protection moving forward. They said she'd be safe now, that justice would be served. But her thoughts kept drifting back to the man she saw slip away. He hadn't been part of any known case or file. No one else even noticed him, but she remembered his face, someone from years ago, someone tied to the very beginning of it all. And if he was back, then maybe there were still pieces left unturned. The next morning, headlines flooded the news. Gala scandal exposes high-level corruption. Former executive cleared after major sting operation, and simple woman becomes key to federal case. The word simple made her smile. A little. They still didn't understand. She had never been simple, just silent, just underestimated. Calls came in from old contacts, apologies from people who once disappeared when things went bad, but she didn't answer most of them. She wasn't interested in revenge or even recognition. What mattered now was that the truth had finally been told, and for the first time in years, she felt free. Later that week, she returned to the same building not as a cleaner, but as a guest speaker for a women's leadership event. She stood on the same stage where secrets had nearly destroyed her and shared her story about power, trust, betrayal, and choosing to rise quietly when no one believed in her. And though the last chapter had closed, she knew the story might still have more to reveal. Somewhere out there, someone was still watching, but this time, so was she.